All right, this is going to be the video that kind of goes through a lot of the procedures that I basically do, just so that you have an idea of what our normal days look like. And so I'll do it in the order that we normally do. This way, if you want to fast forward to a certain part, it'll be a little bit easier to know what to skip and what's not relevant to you. And so we'll go the morning routine, which then goes to math. And then for math, we have ELA and then social studies or religion, which we'll talk about how sort of we go back and forth between those because it's kind of weird online. All right, so the morning stuff that we do, uh, pretty simple and to the point. At 8:15, I'm bright and ready, basically just saying good morning to people as they're coming in. I don't start the actual attendance till 8:16 because people are coming in and um, that's totally fine. And so by 8:16, that's when I say, all right, it's 8:16 now, and then I go to GradeLink and I go from GradeLink call out name. If I don't hear you saying not good morning, but hey, I'm here, then you're late. Because a lot of kids will try to pull that on you. They'll try to pull the either oh I didn't hear you or which they can always hear you. They're good about being muted, by the way, um, but a lot of them will um, say things like, "Oh, my mic doesn't work." So very few of them actually have mics that don't work every now and then. But for the most part, a lot of them just say that because they don't want to talk and they don't want to be around, or they want to get away with stuff. So just to say, be aware in case you don't already know. Fifth grade, um, they have a lot of little ways, and they're the group that kind of knows technology well enough to know how to get away with certain things. They're the group that does the Discord on the outside, and so you can't ever always tell when they're doing multiple things because they totally do things they're not supposed to do at the same time. So just to say, be aware because they're not as innocent as you might think or as they might look. So just heads up with that. So basically, after 8:16, if you didn't declare your name, then I'm assuming you're absent or tardy. Usually it's just tardies, and so usually um, I just mark them tardy and I don't mark absent because most of the time it's going to be kids that are just going to be 2 or 3 minutes late. But usually we don't get too many absences, and if they are absent, they usually will give you some sort of heads up or email. And so I've gotten an email, for example, for Monday, this Monday, they're coming back from Vegas, and so they're going to be there, and Lily's going to be there in the morning, but she's not going to be there in the afternoon. Uh, but for like I said, for the most part, if they're actually absent, they're probably the parents would let you know. Otherwise, a lot of these kids are just late, or they extend their lateness, which is a whole other issue. Okay, so that's morning. uh, After we do the attendance, because I definitely try to do that first thing, then it's either, and it's up to you, whether it's pledge and then prayer or prayer and pledge, kind of depends on how you want to do it. I think normally we I have a little mini flag, and so I usually say, you could raise your right hand over your heart and unmute yourselves, and then we all do the pledge together, and that's our pledge of allegiance, and then we do it to Our Father just because everyone knows Our Father. But there's definitely been times where we can, upload a prayer and then have one person read it voluntarily, and then we all recite it afterwards. So if you have prayers that you think would be awesome to share, totally down. And there's definitely going to be like 5 kids that would volunteer to read it. So just to say, we do have some volunteers in our class, very few, but some. Okay, so that's the morning routine basically is attendance, prayer, and pledge, and that's pretty much our basic three. I'll usually kind of go through, okay, here's what this week is going to look like, and so just in case, and so a lot of times, for example, I'd point to the board and be like, okay, this week we have this test, right? A test on Monday and a test on Friday, and it's this type of test, so just so you remember, right? We have tests on these days on these subjects, which they should already have the rhythm of knowing when a test is coming up. But obviously, they're still fifth graders, so a lot of them aren't listening. So it's sort of it's part of the routine though, is to be like, hey, by the way, guys, this week this is gonna happen. Which I think in this case, you definitely have a lot of uh, this week kind of things because this week we have a whole new system and teachers, and this is the new routine, and these are the new classes in this order, and we also have what is it? gosh, what can I think of the name? Fat Tuesday's coming up, and that means Ash Wednesday and Picture Day and all that craziness. And so those are the stuff I definitely just announce in the morning, right after prayer and all that good stuff. So that's the morning, and then right from the morning, then it's like, okay, we're going into math. And so here's going to be the math section, in case you want to pause or stop or fast forward, because then we go into math. And the way I format math is I start off with, this is the section we're in. We're in 7-5, 7-6. In this case, we're in 7-6. And here are what we're going to learn about, right? We teaching stuff, right? The stuff you already know, but I'm just sort of just in case you want to know. And then I'll give the lesson, and in some cases I like to sort of activate it just by asking some questions that they will answer on. A lot of them should have a mini whiteboard with them where they can show their whiteboard answers. If it's a super simple thing, like for example trying to get their division activated, and you're just like, okay, 35 divided by 5. Show me those fingers so that I know that you're here, so I know you're listening, and so that I know that you're actually understand division to a certain extent, hopefully, because believe it or not, some of them are still working on that. But for the most part, they're okay with the basic stuff. But that's really important too for me, because there are a lot of kids, and I will say, like, give examples because this only you guys can see it, but like Benjamin and other kids that they're looking, and you can tell they're not actually in class, like they're there but they're doing something else. And so having them have to give you an answer that early makes you could see who's actually alive and who's not, and then and that's when you can say, oh, what did you get for that, Ben? And then it's, oh, could you repeat it? Which obviously they weren't listening, but just to say that happens. And yeah, so a lot of it is that, like whiteboard explanation, show me your answers, and this is sort of my quick formative to start and to as we go through the lesson, because most kids are not going to ask questions, right? There are going to be few, and it's going to be the ones that are actually doing really well, and those are the ones that are going to ask questions, and the other ones that are struggling are not going to ask questions, but we already know that. As far as math routines go, right, really, now that you have this, you have the book, we're on 7-6, and you have Savvas. If you don't have the password, I'll totally send it to you, because I just actually took a picture just in case. And so I believe it's teacher 1012, but if not, I'll double check and I could send that. But that would be for the Savvas Realize site, which is awesome. They're used to that too. They're used to looking at or doing the practice sheets that I download from Savvas. And so I usually go reteaching and then practice sheet. So one day I do reteaching, the next day I do practice, because the practice gives you more questions and the reteaching gives you a little bit of questions, but it gives you a little bit of reteaching too, which a lot of them skip even though they need it. But that's life, right? How these kids work. So let's say that's the typical math routine. I do, however, and that's why this is where we're going to be completely possibly different, is that I use Class Kick. And the reason I use Class Kick is because that way my goal is to, once they have done their, for example, their practice, then I can see who's done it and I can check and tell them which ones are right and wrong, and they can make the corrections. I don't tell them what the answer is, obviously you're teachers and you know that, but that way they go back and they can make the corrections and make things right. And I think that's really good for the ones that are in the middle, because then they check themselves, and the good ones are just going to be good all the way through. But just to say that's what I do, but I do it daily, and so I know that one is going to be probably needed to be adjusted, especially because you have a whole lot of other classes. But for me, I have to do them every day, or I try to do it every day, like grade everyone's every day, because that way, one, the grading won't pile up towards the weekend, and two, you can catch who's doing work, who's not doing work, and you can sort of see how things are going. And so for me, I kind of look at Class Kick because they're really good for formative assessment, because you're really seeing what they're doing, what they're not doing. But the hard part is that also means grade link practices kill my day, right? I'm basically grade until 5 or later, because I always set the class, the due date the same day at 5. And so they know that by 5 o'clock this day, I'm turning in my math assignment for today. And so every day has an assignment that, or all their assignments are due at 5, unless it's a project. But for me, that's what I do. If you have a different route that you want to do, let them know. And that, like I said, I'm not going to trip off of it. I'm gone. But that's what I do. So just so you know what they're used to, and they're used to somebody kind of always uh, that they're used to seeing that their work gets corrected by 5 o'clock, basically, which they should be able to do it by 5. But obviously, kids are not that way. But just to say that's that. But if and there are days that I, wait a couple days before I grade that or correct it or tell them to redo things. And so that's just what the routine that I've been going through. All right, that's math. Cool. Next up, we're on ELA, and ELA I believe is the toughest one that I still haven't sort of caught the right zone because there are so many different things for ELA, and so right now we're on the reading zone because we're reading from the novel. But normally, what I would do is, or normally during these times, I try to bunch Wordly Wise, which is vocab, and grammar in the same like day or the same day lesson, because that way, uh, I wouldn't spend an entire lesson on Wordly Wise because that's an easy day. Maybe if you're looking for an easy day, do a Wordly Wise, just Wordly Wise. But normally I would pair it with, you know, we're doing Wordly Wise, but also here's our grammar lesson. And the grammar ones are in the book that have things about like, uh, for example, right now they would be in future tense. And so then they have two assignments. One is the in class one, where they would do it in class, and then you're like, okay, 10 minutes later, and then you're like, all right, what did you get? Blank person. I have a spinner, and so I use the spinner basically to say, hey, this is the wheel of morality, and so whoever it lands on, you tell me what you got for number one. If you didn't get it, okay, whatever, but let's learn from these mistakes. So, with ELA, like I said, that's sort of my pairs. Is I pair up vocab with Wordly Wise, so that they have um, Wordly Wise vocab with grammar. That way, they're similar, and they could even apply those words from Wordly Wise into every now and then the sentences or the grammar issues, which in this case would be future tense. But right now we're in reading, and so it's kind of hard to do reading and the other ELA stuff just because when doing reading out loud, it takes so much time, to go around, all right, next person, even if it's like a super simple, like, alphabetical order, or if it's a popcorn, it just takes time, right? And so I think that with reading, I kind of leave reading by itself just because of the amount of time it takes. But it definitely, like, reading is one of my skills that I need to work on as a teacher. But that's what I use the book. I go straight from the book. Here are some of the questions that we're gonna either do out loud or do in the class kick. But that's my reading routine, because I still haven't found sort of like the fun in the middle with that. And then there's writing, and so the writing part doesn't happen that often. That's why they have the fewest assignments in writing. That, and because it takes time, right, to go through the whole process. And so I wouldn't really expect too much writing. I think, to be honest, you would just probably need to find one more writing assignment for this particular quarter or this trimester, and that's it. They had previously done opinion writing, and so honestly, if you just had any sort of like, okay, we just finished reading this book, or we're working on our tenses, give me a 3-paragraph essay on your thoughts on football. I don't know, but like I said, just it would literally be something, just a one and done kind of thing, just because we don't get given the time, we don't apply writing as much as it should, or at least I don't. So sorry about that. So there you go. that is ELA. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Oh, so that you know exactly where we're at. It's sort of my fake board. Um, so we're on chapter 12 for George's Secret Key to Universe. It's a shiny book, is what I tell the kids. They should all bring it. Every now and then, you are gonna have kids that don't. Still haven't found out the way to figure that out, because it's gonna be Wendy, it's gonna be Janessa, that are not gonna bring their books. But that's where we're at, right? We're on chapter 12. We just finished chapter 11. We were talking about time and how different authors will use chronological order, and then they can go non-linear and be completely out of order. And so we haven't actually talked yet about how cause in this particular book, there's, pictures around it, but they're not like cartoons, they're actual scientific like photos. And so that's something that can definitely be mentioned soon, because it's something that it's a text feature that's very unique to this book. Or not very unique, but it's unique to this book, kind of. So that's just, that's the chapter we're at. We previously were talking about chronological order in books, and so that's where we left off in George's Secret Key to the Universe. Once you get back to the wordly wise, which you could literally, if you want, alternate between a reading day and then a grammar day and wordly wise day, totally fine, because I had done that before and I thought that was okay. So I just sort of wanted to get back into this novel, and that's the only reason why. It's been reading. All right. So with that said, when you go back to wordly wise, they should be on. Oh my gosh, if it's not on the book, I think I might have labeled it in the book that's at school. I think they're in chapter 8, and so that would be where they're at, either chapter 8 or chapter 9. They'll tell you too once you get a word out there too. So just so you know, that's where they're at. And with grammar, they're in future tense, which also the sticky note should be on where they were. Okay, so that was ELA stuff. Next up, we would do, well, they would go on a break, and then they have, their special at 10:30, 10:45. Actually, that's the recess. But then for religion and social studies, it'll sort of be up to you how you want to do this. I've done it 2 different methods this year. One where I did, okay, we go religion until the chapter's over, and then social studies until the chapter's over. But I feel like it felt like the subjects were getting sort of short, or not shorter, but they would forget quickly about the previous subject. And so I think what I found success with is actually just doing it alternate days, one day religion, one day social studies, and go back and forth, because that way they don't become too far gone from one subject. So that's my thought. Like, if you want to go one chapter religion, the next chapter social studies, that's fine too. But that's what I've found that works. In religion, the way, and that's sort of the only little difficult thing that you can't just go straight from the book from, is that when we did the whole skeleton of what the year is going to look like for religion, the main focus is basically going to be the sacraments, and so there's going to be a lot that we're going to skip, a lot of chapters that we're going to skip, and so they just finished confirmation, and so the next one will be, or they're about to finish confirmation, and so you're just going to go by sacraments, right? And so even if you want, which that's sort of a moral question, should we skip the Eucharist because they know Eucharist very well, but at the same time, do they really? Because the goal is by the end of the year is we cover all 7 sacraments. And right now we're just on confirmation, which is kind of crazy that it takes that much time. But there's also a lot of chapters on that particular subject. So just to say, and so the things that I've skipped are things that are chapters that aren't related to the sacrament. So that's why we're all the way on chapter 9, because we have skipped chapters that aren't directly directed towards a sacrament. In this case, for Monday, for example, you should have a chill Monday, because on Monday they're going to be reviewing for religion, which means they have the review questions in the book, and you have the answer to. or the book chapter and all that stuff. And so they're used to sort of, okay, here's the first 10 minutes, figure these out. We were using breakout rooms and never gone, but before breakout rooms, it was okay. Use these 10 minutes. It's going to be quiet basically, and so you're solving it the best that you can, and then after those 10 minutes, bring out the wheel or however you want them to participate, and say, all right, what did you get from room one? Cool, that's good. Everyone agree? All right. Oh, I'm not sure about that. Does anyone have a different answer? And then because we're just reviewing, right? Because this is that chapter, which, by the way, the one thing they're definitely going to have to review on and that you could remind them of is it's tough that there's all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and and so there's a lot, and so just remind them to actually study for it, which I know I do, but it doesn't always work as far as, because there's a lot that you just have to sort of it's like multiplication tables, right? What are the gifts? You have so many of them, so you have to know them. So just to say, that would be Monday. So like I said, that makes Monday a little bit chiller for you, like this particular Monday, because you're just kind of reviewing. They kind of have a process of, okay, we answer them in the written portion, and then we talk about it out loud. Any further questions? Those are test days before tests are days where I have, for that, at least for that subject, I have no homework for that subject, no written assignment for that subject, for independent time, because then that's the study homework, right? Where you're all right, you're studying chapter 9 because you got to make sure you know confirmation very well. Which on Tuesday you have that chapter test, right, for confirmation, and so that's a sort of simple day, right? Because they're taking that test. I actually like to use the Pro Scanner, and I use the Pro Scanner to take a picture of the test and then upload it to ClassKick. I'm a big ClassKick fan. If you're not and you want to do a test through Google Classroom, totally up to you. But with me, I found it easy to use Classroom Kick, because then I can always see who's there and who's not, and because then I can lock the test after like an hour, and that way I know no one's coming back in to do their cheaty answers, which some of them do. Eli does take extra time, but Eli's fine. Like, Eli's a good kid and he tries hard and he works hard. But just so you know, Eli, if he's the last person there and he's taking an hour and a half, he just takes a long time. But he's a good kid, and so he's not, he's not cheating. His mom's good parents and everything. So just so you have a heads up, he'll be the one that takes probably the longest. And if anyone else is taking longer, sometimes you got to ask yourself, is this too much time and is this person cheating? So just so you know. But yeah, and so the little thin book, that's your tests, right, for religion. And so the little thin purple one, it's the tests, and it has the answers in the back. They do it in that weird order where they're really tiny letters, so it kind of sucks as far as the answer sheet goes. But that's where you're gonna have all your religion stuff, so that's prepared, and that's good. Then we go to social studies. And in social studies, they just finished chapter 6, so they're coming back from a test which they did not do so very well on. Normally they're a little bit better than that, but they just finished the 13 colonies and sort of the basic understanding of, this is what the southern colonies look like, this is what they've, what their life is like, here's what the middle colonies are, here's what New England colonies are, here are the actual states that are those colonies. And so that's what they've come from. So they should know, right, that the southern colonies got some really fertile land, and that they're, have slaves. I've already told them that slaves actually occurred in every different type of colony, but that in the South it was a lot more prevalent because of the labor and because of the fertile land at plantations. And so they know all that, or they should know all that if they pay attention. Right? Because we also had somebody that said the overseers in the southern plantations actually made lives better for the slaves, which is one of the most saddest pieces of misinformation I've ever heard in my life. But just to say. Okay. So with social studies, right, the big book and the little books, there's a lot of good stuff that you have as far as good documents and good things that you can use the Scanner Pro with. I like the annotations. I don't use them 100% of the time, just because the kids do get kind of annoyed by it because it takes time, which, so what, right? You're a student. Like, take your time. Um, but that's why I don't use it like for every single assignment. The reason why I really like annotations too is because this forces them to read the chapter at least 2 times, right? Because we read it as a class, um, but then reading once is never going to get all the information down unless you are a genius, right? And so a lot of them will do that, and I can tell just because of how they work that they just read that one time and then they don't read it again. And so this way, I like the annotations because they have to read it again because the annotations, or I call them annotations, but in the little book they're kind of like little mini summaries, and then they tell you on the right side like uh, here are the key terms and here are 3 questions, and then a lot of those questions are like underline or highlight. And I like that because they have to read it again. They have to like find what they're looking for, which is highlighting like why Duke of York bought Minnesota or something. And so I really think it's useful, and I think it helps with reading too. And so that's why I use that a lot, but not for everyone. And then in the other of the little social studies extras, they also have ones with like crossword puzzles and all that stuff. And so that's sort of one where I sort of mix in and out depending on the lesson, as far as their independent work goes, because I think they both have they're good resources in my opinion. The one that has the primary resources is lovely, but it doesn't have one for every chapter. It kind of skips some, and so that's why I kind of use it less. But you use whatever you want to use. So you do review questions from the book. That also works, right? There's a whole lot of stuff. Um, but they are used to annotations. What I do too with the words, because there's also the vocab words, is I say you have to highlight each of those words in the actual um, paragraphs that they provide, or in the short summary readings that they provide. They're used to that too, so they'll sort of automatically 95% of them will automatically do that. And normally, what I would do with Class Kick is I would have one page that has the annotations, right? And then they do all of that. And then the second page is blank, or I write the numbers because the questions on the bottom are some of the open-ended questions from the bottom they could answer on the second page, because it gives them more room instead of writing on the bottom. So that's my that's my social studies stuff. The other thing that social studies that is unique to this class, they like kid news, and I like kid news too, just because it gives them something that's interesting, and it is actually really interesting, and you find out information about what's going on currently, and so current events is what it is. It's literally only like 7 minutes. We play it right at the beginning. Uh, I'll give them 1 minute after 12:30, so it's 12:31, and then I play Kit News. And the cool thing is too, they have the Kit News quiz at the end where it's out loud, and so you'll hear, all right, here's the Kit News quiz, and then the lady asks a question, and you'll hear in the background kids trying to give their answer, which is totally fine. Um, but that's what we do in the very beginning of social studies. They really like it. It's really good, because they get current events in a kid-friendly format. So Kid News is awesome. It's KIDNUZ, if you're looking for it, kidnews.com, Kid News. But it's really good. So just to say, that's part of the social studies routine, but I actually play it every day, even before religion. So just so you know, that's our format. I believe, hopefully, that's at least a big bubble of what our class looks like, what we do. I know I've definitely probably talked really quickly here, but that's the basics. And so, if there are any questions, obviously now is the perfect time, as in earlier than later, because that's the basic routines, and other details. Let me know, and I will answer, uh, even though this isn't class, so you can't go back and forth here. But thank you, and like I said, as soon as can, let me know what other things I can help you with.